what's up, Internet? It's the one, the only Steam Down game, and welcome to Dead Frontier Outbreak 2. And this is the sequel to the previous game out, which is Dead Frontier Outbreak. It follows a man who effectively is deep in the zombie apocalypse, essentially at the start. And the object of the first game was to essentially make his way to his wife, and if you did it correctly, you got the good ending where you meet up your wife and you decide to go to her parents' farm, and that is what you did. That's where the second game takes over, and it will sort of kick on as soon as I hit play. Now, how this game works is very, very different to other zombie games, and that's what I absolutely love about this game. I mean, this game came out in 2010, so it's 12 years old now, and it still holds up so well. It's like a story game. Well, that's what it is. It is a story game. You effectively just they read a dialogue, and then you choose from 2 to 4 scenarios, and then you're essentially judged based on that. Some will actually get you killed, and some will affect your score at the end, because you are graded a letter grade at the end of the game. One for your ability to survive, and the second one is your compassion, to some extent, how human you are. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start this game. I recommend before you watch this one, you watch my previous video, which is Dead Frontier Outbreak, and it will give you a feel for it. Just one more thing, the sound options on this game are non-existent because it's a flash game. So when I'm going to talk, I'm simply just going to hit the mute button on the computer, which will get rid of the background music and allow me to talk, and then I'll continue from there.
On June 29th, 2016, our lives changed forever. A virulent man-made virus had been mysteriously released into the population, mutating the infected into ravenous flesh-eating zombies. The outbreak had claimed untold lives, but somehow my wife and I had managed to survive. We escaped the carnage of the cities by driving deep into the countryside, hoping to find relative safety at our parents' farm. When we arrived, we were relieved, not only to find her parents still alive, but with the help of the locals, they had managed to fortify the farm. The granary held enough grain to feed us for months, and we had plenty of ammunition. It seemed as though we could survive here almost indefinitely. All too soon, we realized things weren't that simple. With no one working at the local sewage treatment plant, filth had found its way into our drinking water. A disease we had all but forgotten about came back to haunt us: cholera. Without antibiotics to treat the infection, people grew weaker and weaker, and finally died. It was clear that if someone didn't go and find some medicine soon, we'd all be wiped out within a month. Those still healthy enough to hold a gun decided to draw straws. Mine was the shortest. Having been chosen for the mission into town, I wasted no time and started preparing immediately. I realized that even decisions that seemed unimportant at the time could make the difference between life and death later on. With that in mind, I headed to my father-in-law's wardrobe and started to think about what I should wear.
Okay, so this is the portion of the game where we actually choose. Sorry. So this is the portion of the game where we actually choose from a list of options. Now, none of these will actually get you killed, but they will affect your overall score. And one will stand out as the best, and the others are just bad. So we've got put on shorts and a t-shirt. Obviously, that is a bad one. Or maybe not. It allows him to move a lot easier. It's more climate controlled, I guess. So, put on a jacket and jeans. Simple enough, jacket and jeans. Most people are wearing that. Put on an old biker leathers. For obviously reasons, more of an armor. And put on camouflage combat combat outfit. Okay, so putting on the camouflage combat outfit is a bad idea because the infected are more likely to smell you than they are to see you. Therefore, a camouflage thing won't really work the way he wants. So we're going to go with the old biker leathers. And I realize that I've been talking about just this little scenario. I've meant to actually catch up. So, if you've been listening, the guy made it and his wife made it to a farm and set up a small community out there, but things have gone wrong. There's a contamination in the water, and now they're getting sick from cholera. They need antibiotics, and they've sent him to go get them. Put the old biker leathers on.
Dirty pair of boots and gloves. I felt much safer with it on. I knew that I was heading straight into a meat grinder. Zombies still wandered the streets, devouring any living thing that crossed their path. I knew that confrontation with the infected was inevitable, and so after I got dressed, I headed straight for the armory.
Okay, so we've got a series of weapons. I'm going to go with the submachine gun. Or maybe the automatic pistol, actually. I'm going to take the automatic pistol.
I took the pistol, since it was the easiest to carry and held plenty of rounds. Having armed myself, I grabbed a rucksack to carry some additional supplies. It was imperative that I traveled light so I could complete my mission as quickly as possible. My fellow survivors were counting on me getting back with antibiotics as soon as possible, and the risk of being unable to outrun the infected was one I wasn't willing to take.
Okay, sorry. It's kind of difficult to remember that I have to mute the game before I can actually speak. I'm going to go ahead and I'm pretty sure we need to take the first aid kit. No, because we had the option of finding a first aid kit. We got to take the crowbar. We need the crowbar.
Both a useful tool and a deadly weapon, the crowbar seemed like the obvious choice. I was almost ready to leave the safety of the compound. For the first time since arriving, I felt truly afraid. I knew that I may never return from this mission, but if I didn't go, what little remained of my family would be wiped out. I knew my wife was sick, and unless I got her the medicine soon, after all we'd been through, I couldn't let it end like this.
So this shows our compassion. This is our second grade, and we're going to say goodbye to our wife. That is the best outcome. So we're going to go with that.
I went back inside the house, climbed the stairs to our bedroom, and slowly pushed open the door. My wife lay asleep in bed. She was pale and her body dripped with sweat. She had had a fever for some time, and I knew that without medicine she wouldn't last much longer. I leant over and kissed her gently on the forehead, whispered, "Goodbye, my love," and then silently left the room. As I walked back down the stairs, I swore to myself that I would find the antibiotics she needed or die trying. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the compound into the wasteland beyond. I heard the gate swinging closed, followed by the unmistakable sound of it being securely locked behind me. I started walking and didn't look back. As I began my journey, I realized that I had quite a way to go, and I considered finding alternative transportation.
Okay, so he's got to walk into town. We could just walk into town, find a bicycle, and hotwire an abandoned car. Well, I'm guessing if you're watching this, you probably don't know how to hotwire a car, because I certainly don't. And why would we walk if we can find a bicycle? So we're just going to try and find a bicycle. Not to mention that if a car was capable of being hot-wired. It's been some time since the infection, so who knows exactly, what state the car is in. There's a good chance it just simply won't start. So we're going to find a bicycle.
I had to walk quite a while before I eventually spotted an old and slightly rusty bicycle sticking out of a hedgerow. It wasn't in very good shape, but it was about rideable, and still a hell of a lot quicker than walking. Unfortunately, just before I reached the outskirts of town, the chain snapped. I would have to continue on foot, but at least I saved myself a lot of time and effort. After a couple of hours, I eventually came to the outskirts of town. The place had been pretty run down even before the outbreak, and I had struggled to imagine it being any worse than I remembered. I was wrong. Once the streets had been the home of petty gangs and prostitutes, but now they were littered with decaying, half-eaten corpses. The air was thick with flies, and maggots crawled and squirmed among the bodies. I took a moment to regain my composure, and then pressed on, trying not to notice what I was standing on. As I turned the corner, I saw another man standing some distance down the road. I had no idea if it was a survivor like myself, or one of the infected.
Okay, so he managed to find a bicycle. It saved him a lot of time. The chain snapped just as he got to the outskirts of town. He's now reached town, and, he's basically entering a bad area of sorts. It used to be filled with prostitutes and gangs and whatnot. Now it's significantly worse because it's just filled with corpses. I know that this guy's infected. I know he's infected. We're going to take him out with the crowbar. Like, how is he not infected, if you know what I mean? He's just standing there, not doing anything in the middle of the street. Guess what? He's a zombie.
I was convinced that the man was infected, and since he hadn't seen me, I had time to get in close. I got out my crowbar, slowly crept up behind him, and smashed him as hard as I could in the back of the head. I felt his skull cave in with the first blow, and after several more there was nothing left but lumps of brain and fragments of bone. Even if he was human, he probably wouldn't have suffered. Having dealt with the situation, I continued on down the street towards a small chemist. To my relief and surprise, the building didn't show any outward signs of having been looted. The door was closed and the glass window was still intact. I glanced around to make sure there were no infected nearby, and then tried the door. It was locked.
Okay, so effectively what happened was I think I may have lowered the score in regards to compassion, because I went up and smashed this guy's head without fully knowing if he was actually an infected. And so I think that may have lowered my score. We probably should have just snuck past him. Anyway, so we've made it to the pharmacy. It looks like it's still intact. We can shoot the lock, kick the door down, smash the window, or break the lock with a crowbar. Well, if we shoot the lock, that makes noise, and that will lower our overall score. Kick the door down, also makes a lot of noise. Smash the window, also makes a lot of noise. Break the lock with the crowbar, doesn't make that much noise. We're going to go with that, obviously. This is why I chose the crowbar, because we can use it for this.
I took out the crowbar and wedged it between the door and the frame. With a little bit of effort, I was able to lever the door open, allowing only a brief cracking noise to give away my position. As I entered the building and looked around, I realized that the antibiotics I so desperately needed would be kept in the back of the shop, so I carefully made my way towards the counter. Just in front of it, I noticed a body wearing what appeared to be a white lab coat. It was probably the chemist. From the blood stain and bullet hole in his back, I surmised that he had been shot to death.
Okay, so we ignore it, it's just a corpse. Search the body. shoot it just to be on the safe side, or smash its skull with a crowbar. We found a dead pharmacist. We're going to smash its skull with a crowbar just to be safe.
I hadn't survived the outbreak this long by taking unnecessary chances. I swung the crowbar at his head over and over again, until all that was left was a bloody red mush on the carpet. Not even the infected could survive that. As I walked into the back room, my heart sank. While the front of the shop had been left untouched, looters had clearly broken in at the back and taken all the medicine. Most likely, drug addicts in search of a fix. I searched everywhere, but the only thing left was a few tubes of hemorrhoid cream. I made my way back to the front of the shop and realized that my mission was far from over. I wondered if I could find any extra supplies before continuing.
Okay, so we managed to get in. We managed to search around, and turns out the pharmacy had indeed been looted, most likely by drug addicts. And the only things left are just some hemorrhoid cream. We could take the cash from the register, search for a first aid kit, search for extra ammo, or just leave. There's no point taking cash because it's a zombie apocalypse, and search for extra ammo. There wouldn't really be ammunition inside of a pharmacy, but you know what there probably is? A first aid kit, at least a basic one. So we're going to search for that. I mean, why would we just leave anyway? You wouldn't just leave, you'd have a little search around. Actually, I should also mention that these options here are actually here because we didn't make any noise getting into the pharmacy. If we didn't bring the crowbar, we wouldn't have that option to stealthily sneak into the pharmacy, because the infected would soon be upon us. So it's because we brought the crowbar that we have now these options.
I realized that a place like this probably sold some basic first aid kits and equipment. It didn't take long to find what I was after. I put it in my backpack and then headed back outside. I pressed on towards the local mall. It was the only other place in town that I knew for sure had a pharmacy. There may have been other places, but I didn't know where they were, and didn't want to risk getting eaten alive while looking for something that might not exist. As the mall finally came into view, I felt a strange mix of relief and horror. I was now close to my goal, but it seemed that the last few hundred yards would pose an almost insurmountable problem. The plaza in front of the building was infested with zombies, idly wandering in circles and occasionally bumping into each other. As I wondered what to do next, the wind suddenly changed direction, carrying my scent toward the pack of infected. In near perfect unison, the infected sniffed the air and turned to stare directly at me. A split second later, they charged.
Okay, so this is why I said that wearing the camouflage was a bad idea, because they've found me without even looking at me. They sniffed me out. So we've got some here. Try to hide in an abandoned car. Well, guess what? That does technically work. You can hide in an abandoned car, but guess what? You get found. And the infected do not give up. So they just surround the car indefinitely. They're pounding on the glasses, trying to get a glass on the door, everywhere on the car, trying to get in. And you die of dehydration a few days later because you can't get out. Try to run past them. There's just too many of them. You'll die. Run around the block and try to find another entrance. That's the only correct one. Or open fire and wipe out the bastards. That just attracts more infected to your position and you get eaten. So all these other ones will get you killed. This is the only one in and out. This is the only safe one.
I knew I didn't stand a chance against the oncoming mob of post-human cannibals, so I turned on my heels and fled as quickly as I could. The infected were surprisingly fast on their feet, but luckily they struggled to avoid the mass of abandoned vehicles and debris that covered the road. I was able to lose most of them by running around the block, and those that still followed were quite a distance behind me. As I returned to the plaza, I realized that not many of the zombies had chased me as I had originally thought. Unable to reach the main entrance, and with the infected now approaching from all sides, I had no choice but to run down a small side alley. There was still a single doorway into the mall, and luckily it was still unlocked. I slammed the door shut behind me. It seemed reasonably strong, and was small enough to prevent large numbers of infected from pushing against it all at once. Still, leaving it as it was definitely posed a risk.
So here is a confession that I have to make right now. This is not my first attempt to record this game. It's not. This is my second one because of this decision. If you make the wrong one here, you will die. And although there are checkpoints in this game, the checkpoint is after this decision. So if you make the wrong one here, you have to scrap the entire game and start all over again, which isn't really that long because you can just skip ahead. But that is effectively what happens. Now, I went ahead and I locked the door, but I leave it unlocked and use it as an emergency escape route. 3 of these options will get you killed. 1 will save you, and the one that will save you is lock the door first, then barricade it. That is the only safe. I'm pretty sure we can barricade it, but we want to lock the door first and barricade it. That's what we want to do because the infected will flood in through that door. This is a spoiler alert, I do know, but we're going to lock the door first and barricade it. That is the only safe one. If you've messed this up here, you've screwed yourself. You have to play the game over again.
I closed the bolts on the door and then quickly looked around for something to barricade it. Luckily there was some old tables and chairs nearby, which I was easily able to wedge in front of the entrance. No one would be getting in or out this way anytime soon. Now that I was reasonably sure that the infected wouldn't be getting into the building the same way I did, my attention turned to my new surroundings. I was in a long hallway with several storage rooms on either side. From the vague odor of damp and chemicals, I realized this was obviously some kind of basement used primarily by the cleaning staff. I could see a stairwell leading up to the main building at the end of the hall.
If we search for supplies, there's nothing to be found. Ensure the area is secure. I think we're going to do this. Ensure the area is secure.
I carefully explored the various side rooms, making sure that none of the infected had made a home here. Fortunately, this part of the building was empty, but I soon realized that some of the rooms posed a serious problem for security. Several of the windows had been smashed in the chaos following the outbreak. Since I didn't have the time or resources to block up every one, I instead closed all the interior doors and wedged chairs under the handles.
So that was the best decision out of them. That really was a good decision. If you just look for supplies, you don't find anything, and it's just a waste of time. We made a good decision there. We're really going to help. That will really change the outcome of the game.
I climbed the flight of stairs to the ground floor and then headed through a small doorway into the main building. The mall was eerily quiet, and despite my best efforts to keep a low profile, every footstep seemed to echo throughout the entire building. The shutters on most stores had been closed, presumably in an attempt to keep the infected from roaming freely. Frequent bloodstains were an ever-present reminder of how little the shopkeepers had achieved. A sickening feeling in my gut told me this place had been the scene of a terrible massacre. As I slowly made my way to the central square, I recalled that the pharmacy was up on the second floor. I could see no signs of life, human or otherwise, and so decided to ascend the nearest escalator and secure the medicine the folks back at the farm so desperately needed. Before I could reach it, the silence was broken by a tremendous bang, swiftly followed by something whizzing an inch past my head. someone had taken a shot at me.
Okay, so he entered the main mall and he'd seen the evidence of a massacre. Blood everywhere, everything's locked up, chaos, clearly something bad had happened. And then all of a sudden he hears a bang, someone took a shot at him. We've got take cover, try to talk to him, run or shoot back. I believe we need to take cover.
I immediately dove for the nearest pillar as several more bullets were fired. Amazingly, I wasn't hit. The pillar offered temporary respite from my assailants, but it would only be a matter of time before they outflanked me. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them maneuvering on the floor above. I had to act fast if I was to have any chance of survival.
Okay, make a run for it, open fire, and try to negotiate. Make a run for it. I'm pretty sure that these people who are firing at you just think you're an infected. A rather quick one, but just a regular infected. If we open fire, guess what? They outnumber you, so and not to mention you're just a regular person. So we're going to try to negotiate.
I realized that they had me totally pinned down, and that my chances of surviving a firefight were slim. My only hope was to try and convince them to let me live. I cried, "I'm not infected," as loud as I could. There was a pause, followed by a voice full of fear and doubt. "Prove it." He ordered me to put my gun on the ground and step slowly out from behind the pillar with my hands up. I could see no alternative, and so I reluctantly did what I was told. As I stood defenseless in the open, I explained that I hadn't been bitten, and that I meant them no harm. The survivors whispered among themselves for a moment, before one of them asked me to take off my clothes so they could see for themselves. I undressed, and a man armed with a shotgun came down to inspect me. Finally satisfied that I wasn't about to eat them, the man asked me why I was here.
Okay, so we've come to an understanding that I'm not infected and, let's just put our guns down sort of situation. Tell them about the mission. Tell them you're looking for food and ammo, or tell them that you're here to save them. Pretty sure if you tell them that you're here to save them, they won't believe them. They're basically thugs. Let's face it, they are. I don't trust them. If it was me in this scenario, I'm not going to fucking tell them about the farm because they don't need to know that. So we're going to go and just tell them we're looking for food and ammo. He could easily explain that he's just looking for, that he is just looking for medicine for his wife. He doesn't have to explain any more than that.
I didn't want to risk revealing the location of the compound. I had no idea if these survivors would try to escape the town and take over the farm for themselves. Instead, I told them that I had come looking for ammunition, food, and a safe place to spend the night. They seemed to buy it, and allowed me to join them on the second floor. As I climbed the escalator, I realized just how wise my decision to surrender had been. There were at least 20 survivors in the building, with over half of them armed with shotguns or rifles. The rest had an assortment of vicious-looking melee weapons. As soon as I reached the top, I was directed toward their leader, a tall and muscular African-American who introduced himself as Ox. Ox told me that if I wanted his help and protection, or at least to be allowed to roam his mall freely, I had to earn it. Apparently there was no longer any power in the mall, and he wanted someone to head down to the basement and turn on the generator. The last man he sent never came back.
Okay, so the guy said that we can basically, take what we need, but we have to do something first, and that is escort someone down to the generator room and restart the generator so they can have power back on. And the problem with that is that they've sent someone down into the generator room before and they never came back. So we can agree without question, refuse, and ask for extra equipment. What we're going to do is we're going to ask for extra equipment, and he will give us extra equipment. If we refuse, I'm pretty sure we get kicked out of the mall, and that's basically the end of the game. If we agree without question, you do lose some of the survival points. So we're going to go and ask for extra equipment.
I told him I'd be happy to help, but that I desperately needed some more equipment if I was going to survive. He grudgingly agreed and got one of his lackeys to hand over some ammo. I was then informed that I'd be taking a mechanic named Smith along with me, partly to fix the generator if it needed it, and partly to make sure I didn't try anything stupid. Smith and I went back down the escalator and through the door I had originally come through to the stairwell. We headed back down, and then Smith pointed out another doorway hidden under the stairs that I hadn't noticed before. I carefully opened the door with my gun at the ready. Ox obviously thought this place was dangerous, so I kept my guard up. On the other side of the door it was pitch black. If there were any windows, they were small, and the curtains or blinds were closed. We listened carefully for any signs of the infected, but heard nothing.
Okay, so we're in the generator room, but the curtains been pulled over. We can't see Jack. We can open the curtains, light a match, or find a torch. Go back and find a torch is the best case scenario. I'm pretty sure that room is full of infected, or at least there are infected in the side room that's connected into that room, meaning that if you bring in light, the infected will take notice and, well, get you. Same with a match, it sort of slows things down. So we're going to go and go back and find a torch.
I wasn't about to get eaten in the dark, so I told Smith to wait while I went and found a torch. The rest of the area had been a storeroom after all, so I hoped there might just be a torch tucked away somewhere. I was in luck. The torch was small, but it offered enough illumination for us to see our way to the generator. We reached the generator. Smith promptly pulled a lever and pressed a few buttons. Apparently getting the thing up and running was as simple as that, because it immediately sprang to life. The lights in the room flashed and came on, and just in time. Our activities had disturbed a small group of infected who had been lurking in a side room, and they were now rushing toward us. I opened fire and was easily able to gun the bastards down. I breathed a sigh of relief and turned to Smith, but to my horror he was lying on the floor, bleeding heavily. In the confusion I had accidentally shot him in the leg.
So this is where finding the first aid kit was a good idea. We can use the first aid kit to heal, to help him. Improvise a tourniquet, leave him to die, shoot him and put him out of his misery. I'm pretty sure if you come back without him, Ox kills you, or he just simply doesn't let you roam around the mall to get your medicine, so you end up dying. Or at the very least a game over. So we're going to use the first aid kit.
I knew Smith didn't have a lot of time, so I quickly removed the first aid kit from my backpack and got to work. I used a tourniquet to staunch the bleeding and then bandaged the wound. It wasn't much, but it was the best I could do. I helped him to his feet and we headed back to the group. When we reached the stairwell, we were greeted by a terrifying noise. All the gunfire earlier, and now the bright lights of the mall, had attracted a large group of infected who were trying to get in any way they could. Luckily, I had securely barricaded this area when I first entered the building. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it brought us enough time to get back to the group.
See, this is why putting up the barricade was a life or death situation. It really was. This is where I died. And then I couldn't go back far. When I died, it sent me back to another checkpoint, but that checkpoint wasn't far enough back. Therefore, I had to start the game over again. So luckily, I padlocked and boarded up the door.
By the time we got back to the group, they were already celebrating. Now the power was back on and they were focused on making the most of it while it lasted. Several had gotten one of the coffee shops up and running and were busy preparing hot food and drinks. Others were setting up a games console to entertain themselves while not on guard duty. Knowing about the threat from downstairs, it wasn't particularly reassuring. Smith had lost a lot of blood and was barely conscious when we arrived. Once I told them he had been shot, not bitten, Ox ordered some of the few women among the survivors to take care of him.
Okay, so as soon as we turned the power on, Ox's men started taking advantage of that immediately. They opened up the coffee shop and are now making themselves a nice cup of coffee. They're setting up a games console to play video games. But, yeah, they have no idea what's going on here. We're going to warn them of the danger. Ask for a reward, grab a cup of coffee. We're going to warn them of the danger. I think that's the... It may not necessarily be our best scenario. I'm pretty sure it is our best scenario, but it also gains sympathy.
There was no time to relax. The infected would be inside very soon, and if we weren't prepared, we'd be overrun in minutes. Before I could even finish explaining the situation, Ox was barking orders at his men, getting them into the best position to deal with the threat. They were only just in time. Suddenly, the basement door burst open, and a seemingly unstoppable horde of infected zombies charged through. The first wave was gunned down before they reached the escalator, but more and more of them just kept on coming. Every gun in the building was blazing while survivors armed with clubs and axes struggled to keep the tide of monsters from climbing the stairs. I had no idea if we'd be able to fight them off or not.
Pretty sure if we stay and fight, we will die. If we get the hell out, that's a game over because we simply just didn't get the antibiotics and your wife dies. So we're going to run for the pharmacy.
I knew there was no way we'd be able to fight off the infected horde. My thoughts turned once again to my dying wife, and I realized that this might be my last chance to secure the antibiotics she so desperately needed. While the others held the infected at bay, I ran as fast as I could for the pharmacy. It took me less than a minute to reach the former drugstore. It had been totally untouched by looters, and all the various medicines were readily available. I could still hear the battle raging behind me, and I knew that I didn't have much time. Unfortunately, I wasn't alone. It seemed that the infected had found another way into the building, and several of them were now shambling straight toward me.
Okay, forget the medicine and run out the back. That is a bad idea. Close the shutters or hide behind the counter. I think we have to hide behind the counter. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So, let's do that.
I dashed towards the counter and jumped behind it, hoping that the infected wouldn't be able to find me and would be distracted by the other survivors. Of course, my ill-considered plan failed miserably. As I lay behind a counter, a gnarled, infected claw grabbed my ankle and dragged me out into the open. I went for my gun, but it was too late. The zombie had already taken a massive chunk out of leg. I knew I'd soon be one of the infected, so I quickly turned the gun on myself and pulled the trigger.
Okay, that epically failed. They saw me jump behind the counter and simply just straight up went for me. Wow. Okay. Let's try this again.
By the time we got back, I knew it took.
Okay. Close the shutters.
I sprang immediately into action, jumping up to grab the bottom of the heavy iron shutters and pulling them down before the infected could get inside. I was only just in time. Had I have taken just one more second to lock them in place, I would have been devoured for sure. Now that I had the luxury of time, I thoroughly searched the pharmacy for the antibiotics I needed. I filled my backpack with as much of the stuff as I could, and then made my way out of the shop through the back door. I found myself in some sort of staff-only area that would normally have been off-limits to the general public. There were corridors leading to various offices and storage areas behind the back of the shops, but I had no time for sightseeing. I followed the signs and headed straight for the stairs. As I turned a corner, I heard a scream and the sounds of a struggle. One of the female survivors had also tried to make an escape, but had been ambushed by one of the infected. She had dropped her pistol and was now struggling to keep the monster from biting her.
Okay. So we've made our way essentially behind the shops. It's some sort of service area for the shops, backup storage, as well as the people can walk around. The staff, I should say, can walk around. We see this woman and she's wrestling with a zombie. Steal her gun and ammo, shoot them both, wrestle the zombie off her, ignore her plight. Okay, I'm gonna try and help her. I'm gonna wrestle the zombie off her. I know that this is a bad idea. Stealing her gun and ammo will lower my score for sure. Or shoot them both, maybe a sort of mercy thing. But we're going to wrestle the zombie off her. I know I'm taking a big old risk with that. But, yeah.
I couldn't get a clean shot at the zombie, so I resorted to wrestling the creature off of her. Amazingly, my plan worked, and I was able to drag the infected away from the poor girl, allowing her to grab her gun and make her escape. Unfortunately, during the struggle, the beast managed to bite my arm, and even though I eventually managed to smash its skull on a fire extinguisher, I was still doomed. As I slowly succumbed to the infection, I felt a slight twinge of pride. I had sacrificed myself for the life of another.
Yeah, it happened the way I thought it would, but not exactly the way I thought I would die. Yep. Very soon, suddenly, run for the pharmacy. So I ended up helping her. Okay, wrestle the zombie off her, steal her gun and ammo. Ignore her plight. We're going to steal her gun. I'm going to steal her gun and ammo. No, I'm going for the, I'm just going to ignore her plight. I'm going to ignore her plight. Maybe she can survive by herself.
This was no time for chivalry. I left the girl to die and ran to the stairs. As I reached the stairwell, I became all too aware that the sound of gunfire, a constant companion for the last few minutes, had suddenly stopped. Had the survivors fought off the infected, or had they all been wiped out? I had no way of knowing either way.
head back to the others. I want to see what happened. I do. I want to see what happened. Because we can take the stairs to the roof, which I think... I'm going to do things... I want to find out. I want to find out what's going to happen. Let's head back to see if they actually did fight off the infected, or did the infected fight off the survivors?
I felt strangely confident that the survivors had overcome the horde. After all, they were only mindless zombies. How could they possibly defeat 20 gun-toting hardened survivors? I got to the bottom of the stairs and opened the large double doors back out to the main plaza. The scene was so vile that I couldn't help retching. Blood and gore smothered every surface. Limbs were strewn across the floor, and entrails were smeared across the walls. To my horror, the only things still alive were currently gnawing flesh from the bones of my fallen comrades. Until I noticed they noticed me, that is. I had no chance.
Okay, so they all died. They all died. Well, at least I know.
By the time we got back to the group, they were already celebrating.
I'm going to shoot them both this time.
Get a clean shot at the zombie, and even if I could, she had probably been infected already. I shot them both and then carried onto the stairs. As I reached the stairwell, I became all too aware that the sound...
I'm going to take the elevator. I know that's a bad idea. I know, but I want to see what happens. I want to see what happens.
I pressed the button and waited for the elevator. It seemed to take far longer to arrive than normal, and as I waited, the sounds of the infected drew nearer and nearer. Finally, the door slid open, and only just in time. The infected had just burst into the hallway and were now charging toward me. The door shut with only a few moments to spare, and I immediately pressed the button for the roof. I cursed my stupidity and laziness as the elevator slowly ascended.
So that was a good decision, but it wasn't the best one. We should have taken the stairs because the elevator took so long, we nearly got devoured. So that lowered our overall score on survival. I kind of knew that would happen, but I wanted to see what would actually happen. And turns out you can use the elevator.
I stepped out into the open air and breathed a sigh of relief. I was on the top level of a multi-story car park which seemed to be blessedly free of zombies. There were also plenty of parked cars in relatively good condition, perfect for a swift and safe ride home. I suddenly noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. I span round and took aim, expecting it to be one of the infected. To my relief and surprise, it was a handful of survivors who had managed to escape the carnage downstairs. Before I could meet up with them, something leaped at me from the shadows, knocking my gun from my hands and nearly pushing me to the floor. I regained my balance just in time to defend myself from the creature's next assault.
Okay, knee it in the groin is a bad idea because it's a zombie, it doesn't feel pain. Punch it in the face, also a bad idea. Grab its neck and push it over the railings is the best one.
As the zombie ran forward, I grabbed it by the neck with both hands. Realizing he'd be unable to bite me, I pushed him back with all my might, forcing him toward the railings. It took every ounce of strength that I had remaining, but I managed to shove the infected bastard over the edge. A few seconds later, I heard a sickening splat as his body hit the ground. Now that the immediate danger had been dealt with, I had to decide how best to get back to the ground floor. As I picked up my gun, I took another look around. There were plenty of parked cars that I could steal, and the other survivors had already begun hot-wiring an SUV.
Abseil down the building is a bad idea. Walk down, bad idea. We're going to join the other survivors.
I decided that my best bet was to join up with the other survivors. They seemed pleased to see another living human, and were totally overjoyed when I told them I had somewhere safe to go. Since I was the only one who knew the way, they let me drive. As we made our way down through the car park, we realized just how fortunate we had been. The place was crawling with infected, and there was no way we could have escaped on foot.
Well, it's a good thing I chose not to walk then, isn't it? We could have gotten out with just stealing another car, but we gain more points with picking up more survivors.
I sped out of the car park, breaking through the wooden barrier and skidding out onto the main road. I chose the most direct route I could think of, back toward the compound, and drove as fast as I could. I didn't get far, though. Not more than 2 blocks down the street, I came across the remains of a serious traffic accident. Several vehicles blockaded the road.
We're going to shunt them out of the way with the vehicle.
I knew that getting out of the car unnecessarily could easily prove fatal. I slowed down to a safe speed and gently pushed the other cars out of the way. As I expected, the previous owners had not bothered to put the brakes on before abandoning their vehicles, so it was relatively easy to move them. It took a few minutes of careful maneuvering and seriously dented the front of my ride, but I was eventually able to clear a path. As I looked down the road ahead of me, I realized that making my escape might not be as easy as I first thought. A huge mob of infected assembled on the street ahead.
Accelerate and run the bastards over, or turn off a back road. We're going to turn off a back road. Yeah, because I'm pretty sure we're going to die if we try to run those bastards over. But I want to see what happens. We're going to accelerate and run the bastards over. It's just more entertaining.
I put my foot on the gas and accelerated directly into the crowd. The first few bodies I hit bounced off the windshield and rolled clean over the vehicle, leaving only a few large cracks and blood splats as evidence of their demise. As I mowed down more and more of them, I began to lose speed dramatically. Body parts began to get clogged around the wheel arches, and the tires lost traction in the blood and gore. Soon the vehicle was practically at a standstill, in the middle of a seemingly endless sea of infected. The creatures that had avoided serious injuries now began hammering on the windows, which soon gave way. I was grabbed by countless pairs of claw-like hands and dragged out of the vehicle. I had no chance.
Yeah, I kind of knew that would happen, but I wanted to make sure. Try again. Oh, crap. Steal a car, join the other survivors. Moving on. Get out and push them out of the way. Shunt them out of the way. Here we go.
I wasn't going to risk driving through a ravenous horde of the infected unnecessarily. I turned off down a small back road and took another route back to the compound. It was a little more time-consuming, but a lot less suicidal. I finally made it out of the town and back to the countryside. The sun was setting in the distance behind me. I had been through a lot that day and was glad that I would soon be reunited with my loving wife. Just when I thought I was out of danger, the engine began to make strange clunking noises. I prayed that it would last until I got home, but God didn't seem to be listening.
We're going to walk the rest of the way because I'm pretty sure if we try to fix it, it won't work.
I knew I had no hope of fixing the problem, and it was far too dangerous to waste time trying. The compound was only an hour's walk or so away, so I abandoned the vehicle and resolved to carry on foot. I smiled and showed him the contents of my backpack. I had secured enough antibiotics to treat everyone who lived in the compound, myself included. We wasted no time in delivering them to everyone who needed it. Over the course of the next few days, the compound began to recover. With the exception of the 2 worst cases, everyone survived the illness and were soon back on their feet. Most importantly of all, I had saved my beautiful wife yet again. I smiled and showed him the contents of my backpack. I had secured enough antibiotics to treat everyone who lived in the compound, myself included. We wasted no time in delivering them to everyone who needed it. Over the course of the next few days, the compound began to recover. With the exception of the 2 worst cases, everyone survived the illness and were soon back on their feet. Most importantly of all, I had saved my beautiful wife yet again.
Okay. So that is the end of the game. It seemed to like glitch a little at the game at the end. I don't think it was even a glitch. I just think it was just bad programming. So tactics, we've got a rank A. You have a solid understanding of zombie outbreaks, and your survival skills are far above average. You'd probably survive a real outbreak. That's a rank A. And compassion, rank A plus. The outbreak has given you a chance to show your true bravery and heroic nature. The well-being of others is your primary concern. I mean, we didn't get an A plus for tactics, but we got an A, and that's pretty damn high. So it probably means that I should say, missed something that we could have done a little better. Oh, because we took the elevator. We took the elevator instead of the stairs. If we had taken these stairs instead, we would have gotten an A plus. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That is it. It took way longer than what I thought it would actually take. Oh, damn, this game nearly went on for nearly an hour. Wow. Oh, it feels so good to play this game again. It really does. I mean, it just brings me back, just sitting around with my friends, my family, playing this game over and over again, trying to get every scenario. We would actually sit around and be like, hey, make this decision, make that decision, see what happens. It's just so fun. It's just so fun. I'd love to say stay tuned for episode 3, but I can't. I really can't, because there is no episode 3. There were rumors about them making episode 3. They didn't make it. This is the end of the game. This is the end of the story. So it's so good, and it's such a tragedy they never made a third one or any other sequels to this. But having this overall game design, a simple point and click storyboard, essentially, is a really, really good idea. And I love it. I really do. So I'm Steamtown Gamer. Like and subscribe and share if you haven't already, and I will catch you on the flip.